Welcome everyone to the Pick Six podcast, where we discuss the biggest stories in college football. I'm your host, Chris Cheng, and joining me is my co-host, Rudy Tomarchio. Rudy, my man, how are you doing on this Friday?
Happy Friday. I'm just happy to have another week of games coming up. And, this is something we've been looking at for a long time. I'm finally glad that we're getting started.
Me too, my man. I am so pumped. So, okay, before we get into our first pick of the week, let's kick things off with your week 2 takeaways. What stuck out to you about week 2?
Well, we learned a few things about some teams that we kind of learned a little bit in week 1, but it just, it showed itself again for another week of some teams just aren't that good, man. Yeah. That's what those preseason rankings are not so great for. And I think we just learned that, you can't really take the preseason for what it's worth anymore.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I learned like Notre Dame, not a good team. I mean, week 1, we saw them play Texas A&M, and that was, to me, I looked at like a Timmy Jimmy fight for all my South Park aficionados that I just wasn't sure. I mean, who knows? In 10 weeks, we may look back and be like, wow, that was a powerhouse game. But in terms of the first 2 weeks of the year, I just am like looking at Notre Dame like they're not good. I think Alabama should never play USF ever again because they give them a heart attack every time they played them in the last 2 years. This year, and Bryant Denny took them to the third quarter midway through. I can't imagine.
You can't even blame it on the rain anymore.
No, you can't.
No one knows Vanilli.
No. No, exactly. Do not blame it on the rain. You got to figure it out. Poor Nick Saban was probably having a conniption as they dedicated the field to him for that game. I mean, what should have been a blowout ended up being what it was. Another thing that really stuck out to me was Michigan. Oof, never stood a chance. Ever stood a chance.
They lost the game day. They lost it during game day when that McAfee segment came through and that kid was talking crap to McAfee, and then he misses the field goal. More respectable of an attempt than I think any of us ever thought. But from that moment on, I thought, okay, Pat's picking Texas. Everyone's picking Texas because they didn't have anything to salvage from that point. And then the team decided to, follow suit.
Yeah, let's talk about our hometown Canes because I'm thinking Miami's the real deal this year. What are you thinking?
I'm on pins and needles because how many times do you hear the U is back and everyone's getting ready, and then by week 6 there's just an egg that gets laid and go, nah, we got fooled again. And this is one of those years where you're like still sitting on your hands going, this finally smells like the real deal. They play like the real deal. They don't seem to believe the hype, which makes me more convinced that it's the real deal. So yeah. One game at a time. ACC loves to throw a nice big wrench in everyone's plan. So let's take it one game at a time.
Yeah, I'm believing the inside joke with my friends is we're winning the Natty. I'm telling everyone we're winning the Natty. We're going undefeated. It's happening. I'm booking my tickets to Atlanta already. I've already got a flight planned. We're going. Miami aside, there's another sleeper that I think is just sneakily good, and they're staying a little under the radar, but I think after week 3 they're going to pop up Tennessee. I think Tennessee is no joke. I think when they blew out NC State and did a performance the way they did this past weekend, I think they're a dark horse in the SEC. Everyone's got Georgia and Texas, but Tennessee, I mean, those numbers are insane. Their quarterback.
They should be able to get over the hump this year and beat Florida again. Should be helpful for them because that's been the one thing. Like anytime they have hype, whether they go to the Swamp or if they go and they stay at home at Neyland Stadium, they just couldn't get it done. And they seem to have a team. They lose one of their best defensive players, and they're still as if nothing ever hit them.
Yeah, and I think what I'm also seeing too, like every other year, is that like teams are coming out of the gate really slow. It's like usually week 1 you're getting a little bit of like the rust shaken off of you, but like this year I just feel like we're in week 2 and teams like Oregon are struggling against like Boise State. They're struggling, they can't get the ball out there. So it'll be interesting to see week 3 where we go. So Rudy, the talk of the offseason was conference realignment, and one conference we thought was dead in the water seems to be dragging itself out of the grave. Ross Dellinger's reporting through Yahoo Sports that Boise State, Colorado State, Fresno State, and San Diego State will be joining the Pac-12 in 2026, which at this point just call it the Pac-State Conference because it's just every state. What are your thoughts on this latest development in the Pac-12?
Do you consider adding those 4 teams a resurrection of the Pac-12, or is it more of a we're trying to sort of keep a league together? Because it's one thing to find programs to replace the ones that left. It's another thing to try to pick up where you left off. And the Pac-12, from what they had, the majority going to the Big 12 and to the Big 10.
Yeah.
It's not quite
And
an apples to
ACC.
apples. And the ACC. You had Cal and you had Stanford go to the ACC. That's right.
What will now be called the All Coast Conference. That's what I'm calling it, or the American Coast Conference.
Geography was one of my favorite subjects growing up. And when I saw this, if you're in Greensboro, North Carolina right now, or in Charlotte, where I think they moved from Greensboro, just remove just like TLC on television. It hasn't been the learning channel for a long time, since they started running Honey Boo Boo and all these other reality shows. Just call it the ACC, but get rid of the name abbreviation underneath it, because Atlantic means nothing anymore.
Absolutely. I'm wondering, Rudy, I know this is like tinfoil hat. I'm getting a little crazy here, but I'm wondering, do you think this might be a setup for Washington State and Oregon State to kind of pull a switcheroo? So what they'll do is they'll invite these Mountain West Conference teams in, right, for 2026, knowing that it's probably going to implode within the next decade, and then make their run to either a Big 12, an ACC. I mean, I don't think they're ever going to go to SEC or Big 10, but do you think they might be pulling a switcheroo?
I wouldn't call it super tinfoil hat, because it's one thing to make the effort to try to rebuild your conference by adding competition, but at the same time, it has to be competitive. And something about the Pac-12 that I don't think gets enough credit is that it was a robust conference outside of football. If you look at the number of sports that was under the Pac-12 umbrella, I think there were more sports sanctioned by them than any other conference in college football, in the university, athletic system. So you talking about multiple national champions in basketball, volleyball, soccer, lacrosse, you're not getting equal competition in any of those fronts to come through. And I think there's something to be said for all of those programs are not going to benefit by adding more teams that are just not quite up to par.
So we know that by July 2026, there needs to be 8 teams minimum in the Pac-12 to qualify for a college football berth. My question is why do you think they're not taking the full, like getting 6 teams from the Mountain West, like taking a UNLV and a Nevada?
The only thing I could come up with is I'm sure there's some red tape with the Mountain West in terms of if too many people go at one time, there might be some legal troubles that come through. But at the same time, too, we'll get into this a little later, but let's not rule out the possibility that some programs may try to run back home and say, I was wrong about my moves. I need to get back in. I miss home. I'm a little homesick.
Yeah. I mean, I piggybacking off that thought, I really think Cal and Stanford, they're going to spend a couple years in this ACC, and they're going to see that cross-country trip, whether it's the money, the resources it's going to cost to do that, or just the physical toll it's going to take on these teams to travel cross-country as often as they're going to have to. I think if the Pac-12 can get its stuff together, we could see Cal and Stanford, hey, miss you.
Yeah.
Could you going through?
From an overall athletic standpoint, it made sense for them to go through there. As much as everyone wants to tout the athletics, it's more of the volleyball, softball, soccer pieces, because the ACC is really strong in all of those. I just, like you said, I think it's one of those things where the money is not going to match what the travel costs are going to be for all of these different programs. Never mind just football. But when you look at everybody across the board that's traveling across country to play their schedule, it doesn't add up, because their grant of rights isn't anywhere near as well. The grant of rights is the agreement, but their media cut that they're getting off of their media contracts that they negotiate with television networks isn't at the level of a Big Ten or an SEC. So you're getting a smaller cut, and you're taking more of that out into logistics. And they don't necessarily have the attendance right now to make up for that.
Yeah, that's going to be a problem. But I'm actually kind of glad that, the Pac-12 is trying to put itself together, because thanks to the Pac-12, the attention is moving away from the ACC. But realignment is proving to be a slippery slope for a lot of teams and conferences. Conference realignment was the talk of the town in the offseason. I'm wondering, how do we fix this? How do we get back to some stability in college football?
I think it goes one of two ways. I think it goes with my main argument when this all started out was, okay, it's one thing to have a couple of super conferences and you have, 16 teams that are supposedly stacked from top to bottom with premier talent, but not all of those teams can go undefeated. Not all of those teams can have one or two losses on their schedule. There's going to be major programs every single year that are going to be 6-6, 6-7. There's going to
Yeah.
be a few teams that maybe they win 2 or 3 games in conference all season long. That's not sustainable if you're trying to, be successful in college football. If you have a couple seasons like that, you're on the back burner. And even if you're a program like a Michigan or a USC or even Alabama, you can't afford to have a couple seasons where you're floundering like that.
Yeah, and I'm wondering with this conference cannibalization where, with the Pac-12, we're seeing them just raid the Mountain West, and then obviously the Big Ten raided the Pac-12. We're seeing this cannibalization of each conference. It's diluting some conferences. I feel like some conferences like the Pac-12, the Big 12, ACC, if Clemson and FSU leave, can kind of become these glorified G5 teams. You know what I mean? It's like, because you're seeing, like, if I was to tell you 10 years ago, the Pac 12 is going to have, Fresno State, Colorado State, and San Diego State. Would you consider that, a Power Five?
Now, and at the same time, you're looking at Colorado State and you're wondering, did you not see what happened to Colorado? Because they left the Big 12 to go to the Pac 12 to then go back to the Big 12.
A lot of buyer's remorse, I feel like, in college football. They're just like, yeah, the grass wasn't always greener. I'm going to go back. And to me, I feel like that's my solution to conference realignment is let's just go back as far as we can. Let's get back to some regionality. And then if anything, let's bring in some relegation. We'll keep the regionality of it. We'll have a top tier part of the conference and a bottom tier part of the conference because that's realistically how most conferences are set up. You've got one or two elite teams. You've got maybe one or two decent teams, and then the rest are just bottom feeders.
Hey, Rudy, when was the last time you used an abacus? Because the weekly AP and coaches polls are out, and I'm seeing them about as useful as an abacus at this point. What are your thoughts on the recent AP and coaches poll?
I use an abacus about the last time. I also use a TI-83 Plus. They were around the same time. Granted, one is probably still more relevant now, but the poll that really matters comes out November 5th. It's the College Football Playoff Committee poll, their rankings that they use. AP doesn't really mean anything other than for the television networks because they want
Yeah.
to try to give you the most compelling matchup from week to week. And that's what dictates the 7 p.m. game, the 8 p.m. game, the 3:30. That's really all it's for now because as we've learned, they don't know what they're talking about either.
Yeah, I just when I saw the rankings, Notre Dame we clearly know is not a top five team when they were first, ranked at the beginning of the season. Michigan's not a top 10 team. I don't know how you lose half your coaching staff, half your players, and then expect them to compete at a top 10 caliber. That was just setting them up for failure, in my personal opinion. Another thing, 6 out of the 10 teams are SEC teams, and not even ordered. I feel like in the right order. I think
Sure.
Tennessee is undervalued compared to a Missouri. Um, what do you think is the answer to the coaches poll and the AP poll? Do you think we should still keep them? Is there something else we could be doing?
What I find what's crazy about it is that, yeah, 6 of the first 7, not
Yeah,
even like in the top 10, 6 of the first 7 are all
exactly.
SEC teams. And yeah, there's been a correction now that it's come through, that Notre Dame is now 18, Michigan's now 17. They've dropped, but if look, the Associated Press is still going to be relevant because it's a major player in the
No,
media
absolutely.
world. Are they going to stop doing their poll? Absolutely not. But
No.
in an ideal world for us, maybe save it for like week 1. Don't
Yeah.
do a preseason poll. Like we talked about this off stream before too. Is power rankings seem great. Let's talk about momentum that's coming through.
Yes. Yes.
Let's
Yes. Yes.
mention some
Yes.
progress that's happening. Like what teams made. You could say like teams to watch. It couldn't even be a power ranking of like Miami homers like us saw this coming, but for a media outlet can say, Miami made a lot of moves in this offseason. Let's see what they're capable of doing. They have a really compelling matchup for week 1. I know you had a couple of fun ideas, though, for how to do week 1 with scheduling if college football can get off this like 30-year scheduling cycle that they have right now.
Yeah, first you got to do what I think the NFL does is you don't really do the scheduling until a few months before the season. That way you can kind of create these narratives. Like I know the NFL likes to do in the first week or two having the two Super Bowl teams like play each other in the regular season, which I think is brilliant. I think you could do that again. Or maybe what you do is maybe not, because again, you have high turnover in the college football. What you do is you do teams like maybe like an Alabama or a Georgia to play the winner. So to play a Michigan, or again, let's just say Washington kept most of their people. You could have a Georgia play a Washington because we obviously know Michigan lost half their team. I also think doing maybe power rankings weeks 1 through 4 is crucial because we really don't know a team in college football until about week 4, I feel like. And especially when you get into conference play, you're not understanding what a team is. For example, Oregon, right? Oregon right now is wobbling their way into week 3. I mean, they're stumbling like a drunk college girl, like in her first 2 weeks that's in the school year, you know? I feel like if they have one more week game against Oregon State, which they very well could, they could find themselves out of the top 10, even with a win. You know, if it's a sloppy win, I really think they could find themselves out of the top 10. But
Totally.
we have seen this season some blue bloods like Notre Dame are not getting a return on their investment when it comes to the transfer portal. We've seen a bunch of busts this year. What are some busts that are sticking out to you?
Uh, as much as Notre Dame didn't have their return on investment so far, the biggest blunder so far, you can't not call out the guys in Tallahassee and in Florida State.
Yeah.
DJ Uyunglele has not been the answer for them so far, but at the same time, he's kind of a fish out of water because his favorite running back last year at Oregon State is now down at Miami, and he's
Yep.
killing it as per usual. And
Yeah.
it's a totally different system. He's looking like Clemson DJU again, and it's a matter of for me, is it a bust or is it just the system not matching the talent that they have available?
Yeah, I think DJU would kind of stuck out right off the rip. We saw what he's like in ACC play, so you know what he's going to be like in this conference. I think the year at Oregon State was a bit of an anomaly. I think he was a great system player. I think they created a system around him for to make him shine. But I also think, like we were saying, Damian Martinez really made him look good because when he couldn't dink and dunk too much anymore, it was just pass it off. Just hand it off to Damian Martinez. He'll take care of you. Another bust that really stuck out to me and is really sticking out to me right now is Riley Leonard. I mean, the quarterback from Notre Dame, everyone was making a big deal out of Notre Dame this year getting Riley Leonard. And you would think, I mean, let's just look at like one person. I'm going to skip a little bit ahead, but like one of the hits I thought this year was Kyle McCord at Syracuse coming from Ohio State. If you were to tell me based on like media coverage who was going to have the better year, I would undoubtedly said Riley Leonard. But Riley Leonard is just falling on his face. I mean, just to kind of give you an idea, they were kind of comparing him to like a 2.0 Sam Hartman. And realistically, the dude has 1/3 of the yard that Hartman had coming into Notre Dame. Hartman was 38 for 12 on touchdowns to interceptions. Let me tell you something. You don't need to go look up the stats, but I can tell you that Riley Leonard was nowhere near that. So to sit there and say he was going to bring Notre Dame into this upper echelon again and get them competing for a playoff spot, I didn't see it. I didn't see it. I didn't see it at all.
It's different systems too. I mean, you're looking at Notre Dame has picked into the ACC now consecutively. They got Sam Hartman from Wake Forest. Now they're getting Riley Leonard from Duke. Riley Leonard ran a Mike Elko team over at Duke, who's now
Yeah.
over at Texas A&M having his own offensive struggles. But with his guys, he was running physical football. You had a great running back who's also transferred out of Duke since. He wasn't really throwing all the time. And if you're trying to throw yourself out of a win like they were doing against Northern Illinois, you're going to find yourself in trouble. So I don't think it's too surprising. And if you're looking at Kyle McCord, that's definitely been a surprise in college football because when you think you're leaving a program like Ohio State, you're near the college football playoff. You're a couple of plays away from trying to beat Michigan. To go to Syracuse, who really hasn't had a quarterback since Donovan McNabb and is
Yeah.
putting up some decent numbers.
He's
Syracuse
crushing it.
is looking like a dark horse at this point
Yeah,
in conference.
everyone is talking about, just for the background, Rudy and I both went to the University of Miami. We are diehard Canes. Everyone's talking about Louisville being the test, maybe the Virginia Tech game. Before FSU became a dumpster fire, that was the game. But I truly believe that last game of the year in the Cuse Dome, like, oh, that team is rolling. And if they continue rolling, you don't want to play a team in the last week who is on fire. And so Kyle McCord is crushing things. But listen, the portal isn't all bust. We've seen some major hits. Who would you say is some standout players that have gone through the transfer portal this season?
I'm going to be a homer. I'm just going to take the easy, low-hanging fruit, and it's going to be Cam Ward because
Yeah,
you can live and die by your transfer quarterbacks if you're trying to bring somebody in for a one and done. And Cam Ward clearly so far after week 2 has been nothing but a home run. He's a Heisman candidate. He's no longer a Heisman dark horse. He's on everybody's radar. He's
yeah,
the
I
only
agree.
quarterback in University of Miami history to have consecutive games to start his career 300 yards for 3 touchdowns or more. So he's the real deal. And
He's a
I don't
dude.
think, yeah,
He,
he's a dude, and his mindset and his preparation has clearly elevated the play of everybody else at Miami too. A few other key players that were already here, like the Maui Noah brothers, a
yeah,
couple of offensive weapons that they added, like a Damian Martinez, but what it's done to guys like Jacoby George at wide receiver, and how you're seeing how more level-headed he is in terms of
yeah.
cutting down on the penalties, because he's being targeted every play. They're trying to get in his head and try to get him to break and either throw a punch or do something for a flag. That entire team is different, and it starts at Cam Ward, because all of that off-season training footage that you saw with Shador Sanders and the stories he has with Lamar Jackson in terms of training, he's a dude. And the
Yeah.
fact that Miami landed him instead of him going to the NFL to, raise his draft stock a little bit, to play behind an offensive line that isn't ranked in the hundreds in the country is it's all systems go for Cam.
Yeah, I think the beauty of Cam Ward is a lot of the things that people were worried about we're kind of seeing erased because of that O line. And I think a lot of people are starting to recognize that maybe a lot of the things Cam was doing, the turnover problems he was having last year, it probably was due to him being under duress, and running around. But speaking of duress, one person, I'll keep it home as well, is Tyler Barron from Tennessee, who we got this year. I mean, this dude is looking like a Jason Taylor 2.0. He is rushing folks every game. I mean, we've only seen 2, but I mean, I have a feeling this weekend against Ball State, this guy's going to be in the backfield the entire time. He's just going to set up shop behind the line for Ball State and just put that quarterback on the turf every play, I feel like. I mean, this guy is a hunter.
It's funny you mentioned Jason Taylor, because he just happens to be the defensive line coach along with Joe Salaveo, who's another guy who played in the NFL. So you got 2, NFL players, one Hall of Famer who's teaching you and giving you more insights into the game. And, the leading the sack leader last year for Miami was Reuben Bain with 7. And Tyler Barron through 2 games, I believe, has 4.
Yeah.
So he's on track the defensive line productivity in general is set there to go. There was a report that just came out through 247 Sports a little bit earlier this afternoon about how, in terms of injuries, that you're going to probably expect Reuben Bain closer to the end of this month. So possibly Virginia Tech. I think there was some hope of trying to have him back for the road trip to South Florida over in Tampa.
Right.
But when they get that guy back, who do you double team?
No, you can't. I don't think you can. And that's the thing. I think everyone was worried about UM's secondary and that's their soft spots or weak spot. But again, if you've got a line that is just getting in the backfield and just putting quarterbacks on their butt, you don't need to worry. But we're seeing the secondary do well. Enough of the homerism, though. I do want to mention some other players, because I think there were some great home runs with the portal. We mentioned Kyle McCord earlier at Syracuse. I think he's crushing it. He's incredible. Again, Texas, we were talking about earlier as well. Isaiah Bond and Andrew Makuba. These 2 guys are coming through on the defense and the offensive side of the ball for Texas, and they're making a statement. I mean, Texas looked like definitively as a contender against Michigan. I know, again, Michigan was gutted, but still, to play Michigan the way they did week 2, very similar to the way they played Alabama last year in week 2 and looked as studly as they did. What are your thoughts on those 3 guys?
What's really interesting about Texas is, their offensive line is homegrown, and they are just really physical up front from what they've done without having to go to the portal. But they went in and they got the holes that they needed. And one of those was at wide receiver. So great pickup for them. And also on the defensive side with Makuba, he came from Clemson. He had a couple of injury issues, and now he's over there too. So it shows you how teams can restock and not have to worry about having a couple of I guess weaknesses in
Yeah.
their different styles of play. So some teams use the portal, some teams don't. They lose out on their talent. And granted, Mukuba was a little bit down on the Clemson depth chart because of those injuries, but that's a guy that you want in depth. You always talk about having too deep at every position, and
Exactly.
that's someone to lose.
And I think that like it's a great example. The reason why we wanted to cover the hits and the busts is because I think the transfer portal has to be used as an auxiliary. I think the bread and butter is still the high school recruiting. I think it's still like development and systems. And then when you're down one or two players, when you just need something for depth or just to like highlight your quarterback or maybe highlight a defense spot that you might be weak, go to the transfer portal. But now, before we wrap things up, Rudy, for today, what are your week three predictions, or what are some things to watch out for this weekend?
Oof. Well, there's a few games that are on the radar. One that I know that I'm going to try to pick some ones that are different than yours.
Okay.
Obviously, game day is in South Carolina, so having LSU in South Carolina is going to be an interesting matchup. Just seeing how they both recover. South Carolina having some moments of brilliance and also some struggles, and LSU coming off of that loss to USC, seeing what they do over in South Carolina.
Yeah, that's really important. There's three games I'm really watching out for. I'm looking at Texas A&M and UF. I think it's going to be a major game for Napier. It's like it's another home
That's the Who
game.
Sucks Less Bowl.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, Mike Elko, luckily he can go in there and stink it up. I think he's still fine. I think his job's still safe. But if those Aggies go into the swamp and they do what we did to them, it's going to be, I think, that Lane Kiffin talk, which we might get into next week. Maybe that's something we'll talk about next week. That Lane Kiffin talk is going to get a lot louder.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this matchup that's so compelling too is not only it's the two teams that are kind of floundering, but they're also in different directions where you kind of expect A&M to have some trouble because they have a brand new coach, so he's trying to bring in that philosophy and try to bring in some of his players.
Yep.
UF, it's year 3. This is kind of a put up or shut up year, and they laid an egg against Miami. I wouldn't say they laid an egg as much as they just got absolutely dominated in that game.
Yeah.
But something interesting to develop out of that is, Connor Wigman, the quarterback for Texas A&M, is apparently listed as questionable. So we don't know if the Aggies are going to go in
That's
with a
interesting.
backup quarterback. And then you have Billy Napier on the UF side saying, well, we're probably going to play both DJ Lagway and Graham Mertz. So you're going to have quarterback by committee in one side, and you're going to have a question mark at the other. So it throws even more uncertainty into that game. And to be honest, I haven't looked at what the game time is for that yet, but hopefully it's not going on at the same time we're at Hard Rock, because I want to have my popcorn around and watch it.
Yeah, I mean, when you do committee, I think the only time that's ever worked in my recent memory is when Urban did it with Chris Leak and Tim Tebow. You have two specific, systems set up for each quarterback, and you highlight both their strengths and you get them in. I think other than that, it's just you're spelling doom and gloom, and you're basically just writing your own obituary at that point. Another game I'm looking at is Memphis at FSU. My God. I mean, as a UM fan, there's nothing I love more than to see FSU as a dumpster fire, but this is horrific. I mean, Norvell's going to be playing his former team, and they got a stud QB, and they love to air it out, and FSU secondary is terrible. What do you think's going to happen in Tallahassee?
The word of the day for that matchup is Schadenfreude. The It's one of those where, if they pull it out, good for them. If they don't, that's another one of those popcorn games, man, because it's such a compelling matchup. As you mentioned, Mike Norvell coming from Memphis with
Hmm.
some fanfare to Florida State saying, well, look what he did with this team. They couldn't get over the hump against UCF at the height of Scott Frost and UCF's national championship quality play that they had.
Unconquered.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I'm interested to see how it works out, because I think it's going to be a motivational piece for Florida State. At this point,
Yeah.
you're going to start 0-3. You can blame the first two on being stuck in conference. You had some issues. Now you're playing a group of 5 team. You're not in your conference anymore.
Yeah.
Are you going to get out physicaled by a team that airs it out? It's possible, because that defensive line hasn't looked good. And that was hyped up as one of the best defensive units in the country this year.
Yeah, my belief is that FSU will pull it out, only for the sense that they need to. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of people are picking Memphis, but my gut and my heart tells me I just can't see FSU losing again, going 0-3. I can't even remember the last time FSU went 0-3. Maybe it was a few years ago when Norvell was in his
It
first or
was
second year.
it was a while ago. Yeah, like they
Yeah.
were that was one of those where they had to appeal to get bowl eligibility because they played an FCS team. And they're saying like, hey, come on, guys. I know it's 6 wins. I know 5 of them are FBS opponents, but we're there. Yeah, that was a
Yeah,
wild card.
I think another game I'm watching this week, it's not sexy, it's not good, but I think it's going to kind of see where this program goes is Michigan versus Arkansas State. How do they recover from that reeling and bloodbath loss to Texas? Do they, pick themselves up by their bootstraps? Do they walk, which they should. They should blow this team out. But we know it's an emotional game and momentum can shift very quickly and a season can go down real fast, as evident by Georgia Tech last year with us. What do you think about the Michigan Arkansas State?
It's definitely a crapshoot. I think Michigan handles it because they can probably just be a little bit more physical against
Mhm.
Arkansas State than they could against Texas. I don't think Michigan has the same issues that like Notre Dame has, for
Yeah, that's
example,
true.
because Notre Dame got beat up by Northern Illinois. And by the way, Arkansas State played Northern Illinois really close last year. I think they won by the Huskies won by like 2 points.
That is very
So
true.
if you see Michigan struggling, those comparative rankings of 17 and 18 in the AP poll going, okay, these two guys are pretty similar. Do they
Yeah,
both stay in the top 25 with those kind of performances? We'll see.
it's brutal. Lastly, I have a sleeper game that I think everyone needs to watch, and that would be New Mexico versus Auburn. New Mexico nearly beat Auburn last year. No, they did beat them. Excuse me. They did beat them. That's right.
They
To me
embarrassed them.
it's so embarrassing that like I can't even remember. They're playing again this year. Oof. What do you think's going to
Yeah,
happen on
I
the
mean,
Canes?
nobody's sleeping on the Lobos over there because the sentiment going into Auburn last week was, hey, we had a squeaker against Cal, but that was over there. So maybe in our home we'll handle them a little bit better because we're an SEC team and we got that bias too because we're a big physical, you could say power two essentially because the two
Mhm.
mega conferences, we're a major player. Okay, well, go redeem yourself against New Mexico. You should have that circled on your calendar, just like how Miami has Georgia Tech circled on their calendar from last year too.
Yeah, I'm genuinely worried for Auburn. I don't know. My belief is they'll come out. They'll be ready. They want revenge for last year, but I don't think anyone saw them losing to Cal. And you just, again, with these college kids, you never know. Well, Rudy, we made it to the end. First show in the books. We should do this again.
I got nothing going on next week if you want to do this again.
Let's do this again. Thank you all for watching, for sticking through to the end. Until next week, be good, y'all. Win the weekend and go Canes.
Go Canes.